I'm so excited to talk to you about Pamela Colman Smith. And this whole story of writing the book actually started when I was a teenager because I was bedeviled by a mystery. There was a symbol that kept showing up in front of me in this little blue cloth-covered book that I had of these black and white images, which were of tarot figures. And in the corner of each one of these cards was this. Now, I don't know if you know what this is, but I sure didn't know what it was because it looked Egyptian to me. And the deck of cards I was looking at was the Rider-Waite tarot cards. Now, there's no R in this, there's no W in this. So I kept thinking, what on earth is this? It's like a secret message. It's like a symbol. It's like an Egyptian sign. What is it? Well, come to find out, years later, I did some research, and this was the signature of Pamela Colman Smith, P.C.S., and there's the dot. And she signed each and every one of her cards with this initial. Now, why weren't the cards called the Smith-Waite cards or the Colman-Smith-Waite cards? Why was it called the Rider-Waite cards? And I didn't find out this answer for almost a decade because when I was a teenager, there was no internet. There was barely electricity, so let's not get ourselves. But it was interesting to go along to find this amazing community of people who were just as obsessed as I was of who was Pamela Colman Smith. So let's start out with the basics. Who was she? She was born right here in London in 1878 to American parents. Her grandfather was the mayor of Brooklyn. She moved from London with her parents when she was about 7 to Manchester. From Manchester, they moved to Jamaica. From Jamaica, she went to Brooklyn and attended the Pratt School of Arts. And from Brooklyn, she came back to London. Now, how did she do that? It was an amazing set of situations in that Pamela was born gifted. So what does that mean? And that day, they didn't quite understand what synesthesia was. Synesthesia is when your brain cross-hatches. We all have some form of it when we're born. We taste smells, we see colors. Our brain hasn't quite formed enough to distinguish between the 5 senses. But Pamela's brain was so amazing is that it retained that ability to cross-hatch. When she painted, she heard music. When she heard music, she tasted colors. And this was part of her gift. Now, when she was a young girl living in Jamaica, she had a Nana there who taught her the folk tales, and they became the Anne Nancy stories. It was a children's book that she designed before she was 19 years old, and it was published in New York City. At that same time, when she was just a young girl, she had her art show with Stieglitz on Fifth Avenue. About that time, her mother died, her father died, and she joined the Lyceum Theatre Tour, came back to London with Sir Henry Irving and Ellen Terry, and was part of the Lyceum Theatre Group, where Bram Stoker was the stage manager and public assistant, production assistant, not public assistant. With his assistance, he introduced her to the Golden Dawn, and Waite solicited her to create these tarot cards. So that's where she came into designing the cards. Now, my obsession with her started when I was a little bit older. I went to a restaurant in New York City, and I had a tarot reader say, "You aren't supposed to read tarot cards. You're supposed to bring the tarot cards out to the world." And I had no idea what she was talking about. So I was just sort of doing tarot cards as a sideline, but I was totally obsessed with Pamela. You know, with the cards that you get, there was a little paper pamphlet about Pamela's life. And I carried this little pamphlet in every purse I had for like 4 years. It'd get all beat up, and then I'd buy another one. But it was like I had to carry Pamela's story with me because I was so distraught that nobody knew who this artist was. And I wanted to bring her story out into the world. So in 2006, I wrote a play called Magician and Fool, and I invited Stuart Kaplan, he owns the rights to the tarot cards, to come to see it if he would give me permission to use the cards, because you can't do a story about Pamela without showing what the cards were like. And he very graciously gave me permission for the first time to have the cards included in a play or a book. And from that, from 2006 until about 2 years ago, I dedicated myself to doing all the research I could do about Pamela. First, there was Mary Greer and her fantastic book, The Women of the Golden Dawn. Then there was Sasha Graham, and she did all this amazing research. There was Elizabeth O'Connor and Carolyn Wise and all these fantastic women who had done this amazing research about Pamela, but none of it was mainstream yet. But they were so gracious. We would write each other and go, oh, did you hear about this? And what about this? I've got a piece of artwork of hers. Everybody was so excited to share the artwork. Stuart invited me to come up to Stanford and take a look at some of his archives, because he's collected a lot of Pamela's stuff. And one of the things he let me photograph was a sign-in book that Pamela had of her times in Chelsea. And in this sign-in book, everybody would have to sign in green ink. Debussy was here, Puccini was here, William Yeats was here. And one of the names that was signed in this book was Rosa Bailey. And I posted this on Facebook. And out of the blue, a woman got a hold of me and said, Rosa Bailey is my grandmother. And she's here today, Nikki Sanders. Nikki Sanders is Rosa Bailey's granddaughter. Is that right? Yes. And Rosa Bailey was one of Pamela's best friends. And so this was a person who actually knew Pamela. I was just about jumping out of my skin. I was so excited that it was a real person. We were finally getting at what she was really like, because there were some bizarre impressions of who Pamela was. She wrote a couple of essays. One was called, Should the Art Student Think? You would hope it was yes. The other one was the medieval school play, where she taught everybody how to make your own costume and where people should stand and this and that and the other thing. But then the other things that people thought about her were very judgmental. Yeats called her a strange, dark devil. Christopher St. John thought she was Japanese because she was so unusual, which will come into play later on. I'll tell you why. And then there was this essay in 1907 by Arthur Ransome called Bohemia in London, where he describes an evening where he went to Pamela's apartment and everybody had to sign in and perform like a Saturday Night Live skit. Somebody would sing, somebody else would do a show, she performed her Aunt Nancy stories. It was amazing. But at the end of this essay, what he writes was, Pamela's folktales of Jamaica will live on forever because they are transmitted in the way that the best folktales are, from man to man. And there was a part of me going, what? You went and saw Pamela perform, and the way that you're remembering her is that it's going to be passed down from man to man. I mean, there was just a part of me that my head just blew up. Because, once again, people weren't seeing who Pamela was. So in researching Pamela, I decided that I wanted to write a book about how did Pamela create these tarot cards. I didn't want to write a biography. There's some fantastic people writing biographies about Pamela right now. I wanted to write a historical fiction, getting inside Pamela's head and trying to find who the role models were for the magician, the fool, the empress, the hanging man. Who were these people in her life? So I started at the very beginning. I started with the fool. And at that time, in Pamela's world, with the Lyceum Theater and all the actors, there was a very debonair actor named William Terrace, or Terrace as they sometimes called. And he was a big Robin Hood type actor. And he was actually stabbed to death in front of the Adelphi Theater, and he haunts the underground. But in his day, he was Errol Flynn. And he was part of the retinue that Sir Henry Irving had cast in his shows. The other person who was a big imprint on Pamela was Sir Henry Irving himself. He's the one who hired her out of New York to come back to England. And at that time, his production company hired 350 people. He had memorized over 800 people in his lifetime. It was an amazing process that he was the biggest actor-manager of his day. And he hired Pamela. When they were on tour, Sir Henry Irving was the one who taught Pamela Egyptian hieroglyphics. He was part of her tutor. Now, he also thought Pamela was totally obnoxious. He called her Ellen Terry's red-haired devil. So because she came from Jamaica, she had a larger-than-life laugh, a larger-than-life persona, which was not in step with the Victorian young ladies. So here are Pamela's two role models, Sir Henry Irving and William Terrace, and they are her magician and fool card. So, in trying to get to the last part of this mystery, what is this? When Pamela was attending the Pratt School of Art, Arthur Wesley Dow was the chairman. And one of the things he asked all his students to study was Japanese block prints. And he asked them to all take their initials and practice putting their initials in a Japanese form. Why, you may ask, is there a dot? Well, this is an interesting conceit of the times. Titles usually had dots after them, but there's also this wonderful American-British hybrid. In England, you call this a full stop, and the Oxford Dictionary definition is, I've come to a full stop of what I was expressing. In America, this is called a period, and this is because it's Latin for periodus, and that means a complete thought. So this is a wonderful hybrid between the American and the English period. And I'm just going to pause here just for a quick minute because I want to say that in Pamela's day, Sir Henry Irving was the actor of his day. He's the one who stirred the blood and inspired Pamela to become the artist that she is. And I reached out to a friend today to please come and support my book. And I'd like to introduce you to him. It's Mr. Bryan Cranston, who's here. And just like Pamela,
can I come up and say hello?
Please come up and say hello. Hello, my darling.
How are you?
I'm fine.
Good
I
to
wanted
see
to
you.
find
Hi, everybody.
a contemporary of Sir Henry Irving that would be here. So here is Mr. Cranston, and he's here supporting the book and art in general. So
Thank
you,
you.
sir.
I was looking for a book to
There you
read.
go.
Yes.
Ryan is now rehearsing Network at the National Theater. Ivo van
Yes.
Hove is your director.
Ivo van Hove is
Yes.
directing. We're at the National beginning in November.
Excellent.
And
you
all
are
the
playing?
way, run all the way through the end of March.
Yes.
Howard Beale, I get to play. It was based on the movie in the 1970s. Yeah, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. Well, it's the way Paddy Chayefsky wrote was so theatrical.
Yes.
And full, and his scope wasn't grand. He kept his ideas and his opinions to a narrow form, and so this really lends itself to tell this in a theatrical way.
And this is so great that this cross-hatching that we're talking about, the British and the American acting styles, here you are in England at the National Theater playing this great role. I mean,
I'm so lucky.
You are, but you're so talented too.
I'm so lucky. No, it's been great so far, and we're right at that period in rehearsal where you're you're nervous. Are we finding it? Are we going to bloom, or are we going to dry out on the vine? There's always that fear every time you go, and no matter how much confidence you have in the director or the product or yourself or the team, it's you always go through that.
You're being the fool stepping off the cliff, taking the risk, and
right.
you're the magician making magic happen at the same
Kind
time.
of same thing. It's scary and fun.
Yeah, no guts, no glory.
I can't wait to read this.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you, Brian, for stopping
you.
by. I really
Good
appreciate
to see you.
it.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Okay.
Nice to
When
see
you
you.
come back, fine, I still don't get you, but we'll keep filming.
Okay, so part of the reason I wanted Brian to come here is that my husband got to be in a play with him on Broadway, and Brian sort of personified the theater beast. He has this magnetism when he's on stage that there's a crowd following him because of what he exudes, and he's been very supportive about me trying to get this story about who was Sir Henry Irving. In fact, Judi Dench had denounced earlier in the year that it was sort of a crime that nobody in theater schools knew who Sir Henry Irving was anymore. So I'm so excited that in Magician and Fool, we'll get to explore not only Pamela, but who the Lyceum Theater Company was, who Ellen Terry was, who Florence Farr was, and Annie Horriman, and all these amazing women at the time who were the artists of the day. So that's really been my intent, to show Pamela's world. She had this amazing group of people around her, but she did it all on her own. I mean, the fact that she collaborated with Waite, I think the signature shows that she was trying to say, this is my definition of my artwork. So there's my talk, and if you have any questions, I'd be very happy to answer them for you. If you've got any burning questions about Pamela or this story, or... That's an excellent question. She wanted to know why her name was not on the deck of cards. Well, in 1909, the cards were first published by Sprague and Company. They didn't do so well. And so Ryder, the publisher, was approached by Waite and said, you can sell it for 6 shillings, and we'll sell it cheaper. But it's like intellectual property now. If you work for Disney, your name isn't on any of those cartoons. It was the same idea, although the men usually had a better chance of getting their artwork attributed to them. But I think Pamela's signature was her way of saying, no, this is my artwork. Even if that's right, exactly. But it was also, in the day, women still didn't really have the rights to vote. So we're talking about somebody getting to say that they own this intellectual property, which is very yikesy. Yeah. Any other questions? Oh, we had a great time. Linda Marson here from Australia is a great tarot teacher, and she was part of this Gothic image tour that we took through mythical England this summer. And one of the places that we went in Bude was to Pamela's gravesite. And Linda had a crystal, which we used to, as we had a nice funeral service for her, and all of us went around the circle and we said, "Thank you, Pamela, for what you've given to the world." And I got a little choked up because I had this whole thing planned in my head what I was going to say to her, and I couldn't do it. I was just dried, and I was mad at myself. And several other people that were part of the group said, "Calm down." One of the psychics came up to me and she said, "Pamela would have hated you fussing like this, because first of all, the tarot cards weren't her soul's life's art. That was just one of the things that she did. But Linda lost this crystal that we were going to use as part of this funeral service. We had it out there, it was gone. We went back to the King Arthur Hotel that night, and the bus driver comes in with the crystal. He found it on the bus, right? How it got there, we don't know.
Well, I know how it got there. Pixie put it there.
There you go. Pixie put it there.
She took it away.
And then she put it back. But that night in the bar, we had a great time because we really felt that we had a communion with Pixie. And come to find out, just 2 weeks ago, Mary Greer, the other tarot docent on the stud, she found a letter that it was exactly at that same hotel where Pamela auditioned for Sir Henry Irving to go on tour. At the round table that we were at, that was the round table where she showed him her toy theater and said, "I would love to be a part of this." And he said, "That would make a great opera. You can come along and be part of the Lyceum Theater." So that was thrilling.
Why she took it from?
She asked, I mentioned Bram Stoker, and was Pamela active with the Golden Dawn? Pamela was encouraged, they studied by degrees like Scientology, like the first degree. Pamela treated this like she did Pratt School of Art. She buffeted her way through it. She took a little of this, a little of that, but she didn't graduate from the Golden Dawn degrees, just like she didn't graduate from Pratt. But she certainly studied what she wanted to study. She went to the museum and she saw the Solabusca cards and the Marseille deck, and she got inspiration from all sources. And I think that the Golden Dawn was important in terms of her understanding maybe astrology and symbols and Egyptian symbols, but she was a determined person to learn on her own terms. So I don't think the Golden Dawn could contain her. Legacy. I mean, I think the tarot cards are fantastic. They've sold over 100 million decks in 20 countries. It's amazing, the reach that she's had. But I think her biggest lesson to me was the fact that she just made art. She didn't care. Some people say, was she autistic? Was she Asperger's? Because she just did art. She didn't care if she made a living. She didn't care if she paid the rent. But in my mind, that's because she was really gifted and she had a fountain of gifts that she wanted to express to the world. She had a one-woman show. She designed book plates and wallpaper and costumes and sets, and the art just flowed out of her. And I think, to me, the biggest lesson of her is she lived an authentic life. Now, it wasn't without heartbreak and bankruptcy, but it was still an authentic life. It was fully lived, and I really admire that about her. How did she die? Pamela died in 1951. She retired to Bude in Cornwall, and it was so interesting. We went there and saw the house that she died in. She lived in a series of houses that looked very much like a house might look in Jamaica. It was white, and it looked over the water. It was very much in the style of the colonial homes that were in St. Andrews, Jamaica, when she lived there during the time. There was a huge earthquake in St. Andrews in 1900, so everything that she was familiar with would have been destroyed. But the house that she lived in Lizard, the house that she lived north of London, they all had the same style of architecture. I think she was trying to find her home again. But that's just Jen. She asked, when Pamela died, it was very cryptic that she died with a female companion. That particular companion was her servant when she had bought the monastery in Lizard to be the retreat for priests. It was an elder wife and a husband. The husband passed away, and she followed Pamela to Bude to take care of her. Now, it's very controversial. I mean, at that time, there were a lot of spinsters because of World War I and World War II, and Pamela had a lot of friends who were lesbians. Was Pamela lesbian? who knows? She loved both men and women as companions and fellow members of the artist community. She had crushes on men when she was a teenager touring with the Lyceum Theater, but that doesn't mean she, left her love. She also lived with Edie Craig, who had affairs with several women. So I don't think she defined herself in terms of sexual identity that way. I think she had a big open heart, and if you could laugh and share art with her, I think you were part of her world.